My name is Andrea Townsend. I'm 27 years old. And 3 weeks ago, my parents sat in the front row of my grandfather's will reading, smiling, because they were absolutely sure they were about to become millionaires. My dad already had a realtor on speed dial. My mom wore a new handbag she'd bought for the occasion. They didn't know what Grandpa Walter had written in that envelope. Nobody in that room did. The lawyer read the first line and my mom screamed. My dad lunged across the table and grabbed the papers. Then the lawyer looked at me, just me, and said very calmly, "Your grandfather asked me to read this next part only if they reacted this way." Every single person in that room froze. My grandfather didn't set a trap. He told the truth, one last time, to a room full of people who needed to hear it. Before I take you back to that room, if you enjoy family stories like this, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you truly resonate with what you hear. And while you're at it, drop a comment with where you're watching from and your local time. I always read those. Now let me take you back to Millbrook, Ohio. To the day my grandfather's lawyer called me and said, "Andrea, you need to be here on Friday. Your grandfather insisted." The drive from Columbus to Millbrook takes about 2.5 hours if you don't hit construction on Route 71. I've made that drive so many times I could do it with my eyes closed. Every rest stop, every pothole, every stretch of flat Ohio farmland between here and there. Millbrook is the kind of town where the gas station attendant knows your grandmother's maiden name. Population 4,000. One traffic light. And for 60 years, the biggest employer was Townsend and Sons, my grandfather's construction supply company. He built it from a single delivery truck and a handshake. By the time he sold the business and retired, half the buildings in 3 counties had Townsend materials in their walls. Grandpa Walter was 82 when he died. Peacefully, they said, though I'm not sure anything about those last few years was peaceful. I drove down for the funeral on a Tuesday. The leaves were just starting to turn. I remember gripping the steering wheel too tight, my knuckles white, telling myself I would not fall apart in public. When I got to the funeral home, I expected to be the first one there. I always was. I wasn't. My parents, my dad, Greg, and my mom, Diane, had arrived the night before. That alone was strange. They lived in Columbus too, 40 minutes from me, but I hadn't seen them in almost 5 months. We weren't officially estranged. We just existed in the same city without touching. I found my mom in the foyer, hugging a woman I didn't recognize, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "He was like a father to me," she was saying. "This family meant everything to him." I stood in the doorway and watched her perform. That's the only word for it. Perform. She had a tissue in her left hand and a compact mirror in her right, checking that the mascara was running in the correct direction. Grief as presentation. Sorrow with staging. My dad was across the hall, talking to someone in a suit I didn't recognize. They were speaking in low voices. My dad doing that thing he does when he's trying to seem important. Chest out, chin up, one hand in his pocket like he's posing for a campaign ad. He hadn't called me to say Grandpa died. I'd found out from Aunt Ruth. I stood there for a long time before anyone noticed me. When my mom finally looked up and saw me, she smiled, the tight, controlled smile she used when company was present, and said, "Oh, Andrea, there you are." Like I was late to a dinner party. Like I hadn't just driven 2.5 hours with tears blurring the highway lines. And I didn't understand yet why any of that mattered. But I would. The service was standing room only. Grandpa Walter had touched a lot of lives in Millbrook. The florist, the hardware store owner, 3 generations of families who'd worked at Townsend and Sons. They all came. My mom organized the seating. She organized the program. She organized who would speak and in what order. And when I asked if I could read something, a poem Grandpa had loved, she put her hand on my arm and said very gently, "Greg will speak, honey. He's the son. It should come from him." So my dad stood at the podium in a suit that still had the price tag crease across the shoulders, and he read a eulogy that sounded like it was pulled from a template online. He called Grandpa Walter a pillar of the community, He talked about family values and the importance of hard work. He mentioned a book Grandpa supposedly loved, got the title wrong. It was Hemingway, not Steinbeck. Grandpa would have hated that. He also said, Dad always put family first. And I watched 3 people in the front pew look at the floor at the same time. The whole thing lasted 4 minutes. 4 minutes for 82 years of a man's life. 4 minutes from someone who hadn't spoken to that man in over 2 years. I sat in the 3rd row, hands folded in my lap, jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. I had a folded piece of paper in my jacket pocket, the poem I'd wanted to read. Mary Oliver. Grandpa used to say her writing sounded like somebody who actually paid attention to the world. I kept the paper in my pocket. It stayed there for weeks. Next to me, my great-aunt Ruth, Grandpa Walter's younger sister, reached over and squeezed my hand. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then very quietly, almost under the organ music, "Your grandfather knew, honey. He always knew." I looked at her. Knew what? She just patted my hand and faced forward. After the service, people filed past to pay their respects. I waited until the line was gone, then stood alone by the casket for a few minutes. I told him I was sorry I hadn't come the Thursday before he died. I'd had a double shift at the library. I'd planned to come that Sunday instead. He didn't make it to Sunday. When I finally walked outside, Greg was waiting by the parking lot. He didn't offer condolences. He said, "You still have the key to Dad's house, right? We need to get in there and start sorting things." I drove to Grandpa's house the next morning. The house on Oak Hill Road, white clapboard, green shutters, a porch swing that hadn't swung right since 2019. My grandmother Maggie had planted hydrangeas along the front walk. They were still blooming somehow. Nobody was watering them. They just kept going. The front door was unlocked. I found my parents in Grandpa's study. The desk drawers were pulled open. File folders were spread across the floor. My dad was on his knees in front of the filing cabinet, flipping through papers so fast he was tearing the edges. My mom stood behind him, arms crossed, directing. "Check the bottom drawer." He always kept the important stuff at the back. "What are you looking for?" I said from the doorway. My dad didn't look up. "Insurance papers." He was lying. I could tell because I'd known him my whole life, and the only time Greg Townsend moved with urgency was when money was involved. They weren't looking for insurance papers. They were looking for the will. "Dad, the lawyer has all of that. Mr. Finch." "I know who Harold Finch is." He stood up, a folder in his hand. "This is my father's house. I don't need permission to be here." My mom turned to me. The look she gave, it wasn't anger. It was dismissal. The kind of look you give a child who's wandered into a room they don't belong in. I stepped back. Old habit. Every time I'd ever pushed back, even a little, my mom would go silent for days. No calls, no texts, nothing. A week of nothing. When I was 14, that silence felt like the end of the world. At 27, it still made my stomach drop. I left. 20 minutes later, sitting in my car in the Walgreens parking lot with the engine running, my phone rang. The caller ID said Finch and Associates. "Andrea," said a voice I recognized from family dinners 15 years ago. "This is Harold Finch. Your grandfather left specific instructions. You need to be at my office this Friday. And Andrea, don't tell your parents what I'm about to say." Harold Finch had been Grandpa Walter's lawyer for 25 years. He'd handled the sale of Townsend and Sons. He'd drawn up the trust when Grandma Maggie got sick. He was the kind of man who wore the same brown suit to every occasion and never raised his voice above a conversational murmur. So when he told me, on the phone, that my grandfather had rewritten his will 4 years ago, and that the new version was substantially different from anything my parents expected, I believed him. "Walter changed everything in 2022, Finch said, right after your father had him moved to Sunrise Meadows." Sunrise Meadows. The name alone made my chest tight. It was the cheapest assisted living facility in the county. Linoleum floors, shared rooms, the smell of industrial cleaner that never quite covered up what it was trying to cover. A television in the common room that was always tuned to game shows nobody was watching. Grandpa Walter, a man who'd built a company worth millions, who'd once hosted the governor at his dining table, who'd put 3 employees' kids through college because he believed in investing in people. He spent his last years in a place that charged $2,400 a month because his son picked it out of a brochure without visiting a single facility in person. I'd been to Sunrise Meadows more times than I could count. I knew the nurses by name. I knew which hallway smelled worst on Tuesdays. I knew the crack in the window of Grandpa's room that let cold air in every winter. And I knew, because he told me just once, very quietly, that the first week there, he cried every night. What did he change? I asked. I can't discuss specifics over the phone, but you need to be there, Andrea. If you're not present at the reading, contesting the will becomes significantly easier for any other parties. Other parties. He meant my dad. There's one more thing, Finch said. Your grandfather also left a letter. He asked me to read it aloud, in front of everyone. I sat in that Walgreens parking lot for 20 minutes after we hung up. The engine was still running. A woman walked past with a cart full of diapers and gave me a look like maybe I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. I didn't know what Grandpa had left me. I didn't know what was in that letter. I only knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened on Friday, my family was never going to be the same. Here's what you need to know about my dad and my grandfather. When I was 15, Greg asked Grandpa Walter for $200,000 to open a sports bar. He had a name picked out, Townsend Tap. He had cocktail napkins printed. He did not have a business plan, a location, a liquor license, or any experience in food service. Grandpa said no. He didn't say it cruelly. I know because I was in the next room doing homework, and the walls in that Oak Hill Roadhouse were thin. I heard Grandpa say, Greg, I'd give you the shirt off my back, but I'm not going to fund something that'll eat your savings in 6 months. Come back with a real plan and we'll talk. Greg didn't come back with a plan. He came back with rage. You built your empire, but you won't let your own son build his? I'm trying to protect you. You're trying to control me, like always. The front door slammed. Dishes rattled in the cabinet. And that was the beginning of the end. Over the next 12 years, my dad pulled away. The visits got shorter, then less frequent, then non-existent. My mom, who had always been the one to organize holiday dinners and birthday calls, stopped organizing. She sided with Greg, completely, vocally, without reservation. Your father never respected Greg, she told me once when I was 19. We owe him nothing. Meanwhile, Grandpa Walter sat in his house on Oak Hill Road, alone, and waited for a phone call that never came. I was the one who kept driving down. Every Sunday. 2.5 hours there, 2.5 hours back. I'd sit on the porch swing with him, read him whatever novel I was into that week, and eat the peach cobbler I'd learned to bake from my grandmother's recipe card. He told me once, staring at the oak tree in the front yard, one day, Greg will understand what he threw away. He paused. I just hope it won't be too late. I didn't understand then. I'm starting to now. The night before the will reading, I called Aunt Ruth. She picked up on the first ring, like she'd been waiting. Ruth Dawson was 78, sharp as a tack, and the only person in our family who said exactly what she meant without padding it in politeness. She'd never married. She'd run the Millbrook Public Library for 30 years before I was even born. She was, in a lot of ways, the reason I became a librarian. Mr. Finch called me, I told her. He says I have to be there tomorrow. You do. Ruth, do you know what's in the will? A pause. Then, I know Walter made his choice years ago. He watched Greg leave, and he watched you stay. I didn't stay for... I wasn't trying to... I know, sweetheart. That's the whole point. She told me something then that I hadn't known. In 2020, when Grandpa caught pneumonia and was hospitalized for 3 weeks, Ruth had called Greg, every day. Greg said, I'll come this weekend on a Monday. By Friday, he'd stopped answering. The following Monday, same thing. 3 weeks in the hospital. Greg never showed. I had dropped everything. I'd called my supervisor at the library, explained the situation, used every sick day and vacation day I had, and drove to Millbrook General. I slept in the chair next to his bed for 11 nights. Nobody asked me to. I just did it because the alternative, leaving him alone in a hospital room with nobody, wasn't something I could live with. You didn't do it for money, Andrea, Ruth said. And Walter knew that. That's exactly why. I stared at the wall of my apartment, a crack in the plaster I kept meaning to patch. Okay, I said. I'll be there. Good. And Andrea? Yeah? Wear something with pockets. You'll want somewhere to put your hands. She hung up. I almost laughed. Almost. But I had no idea what was waiting in that room. And honestly, I don't think any of us did. Now, before I walk into that lawyer's office, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been the one who shows up? Every holiday, every hospital visit, every Sunday, while everyone else has an excuse? And then, when it matters, they still treat you like you don't count? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your story, because what Grandpa Walter did next, it was for people like us. Friday, 10 a.m. Finch and Associates, Main Street, Millbrook. The office was above the old hardware store, up a narrow staircase with carpet so worn you could see the wood underneath. Harold Finch had been working out of this building since before I was born. The conference room smelled like lemon furniture polish and old paper. A long oak table ran down the center. 8 chairs, a water pitcher nobody touched. My parents were already seated when I arrived. Front row, left side, like they'd gotten there early to claim their spot. My dad wore a blazer I'd never seen before. My mom had her new handbag on the table in front of her, positioned just so, the way you place something you want people to notice. I took a seat at the far end, near the window. Aunt Ruth sat beside me. She smelled like lavender and coffee, same as always. She didn't say anything. She just sat, solid and steady, like a lighthouse in fog. Pastor Jim Henley from First Methodist was there too, Grandpa's church for 40 years. He'd baptized me as a baby. He'd officiated Grandma Maggie's funeral. He sat with his hands folded, looking at the table like a man preparing for something he'd rather not witness. 2 cousins, Dave and Patty, children of Grandpa's oldest friend, filled the remaining seats. Dave kept rubbing his thumb against his index finger, a nervous habit I remembered from family picnics 20 years ago. Patty sat perfectly still, her purse in her lap, her expression unreadable. A paralegal sat in the corner with a notepad and a pen that she clicked every few seconds. The room was full but quiet, the kind of quiet that hums. My dad leaned toward my mom. He thought he was whispering. He wasn't. Once this is done, we call the realtor Monday. My mom nodded. She patted his arm. Then she glanced at me, a quick, measuring look, and turned away, like I was furniture. Harold Finch entered through a side door carrying a leather portfolio thick enough to be a manuscript. He sat at the head of the table, adjusted his glasses, and opened the portfolio without greeting anyone. He didn't smile. He didn't make small talk. He just looked at the papers for a long moment, then looked up. Let's begin. Finch read the preliminary language first. The standard stuff. The recitation of Walter Henry Townsend, resident of Millbrook, Clermont County, Ohio, being of sound mind and body. The date, April 14th, 2022. Witnessed by 2 parties, notarized. My dad's knee bounced under the table. Tiny vibrations I could feel through the floor. Mr. Townsend's estate, Finch continued, comprises the following. The residential property at 14 Oak Hill Road, Millbrook. All savings and investment accounts held at First National Bank of Clermont County. Personal effects, including furniture, vehicles, and family heirlooms. Greg sat forward. His hands were flat on the table. Finch turned a page. He read slowly, carefully, the way someone reads when they want every word to land. Regarding my property at 14 Oak Hill Road, Millbrook, Ohio, I bequeath this property, in its entirety, to my granddaughter, Andrea Marie Townsend. 2 seconds of silence. My dad blinked. He looked at my mom. She looked at Finch. I'm sorry, Greg said. Say that again? Finch didn't repeat himself. He turned another page and kept reading. Regarding my savings accounts, investment portfolios, and all remaining financial assets. I leave them, in their entirety, to my granddaughter, Andrea Marie Townsend. My mother's hand went to her chest. There's a mistake. There is no mistake, Mrs. Townsend. That can't be right. My dad's voice cracked high. He was standing now. His chair had scraped back so hard it hit the wall. That's my father. That's my father's money. Finch looked up at him over his glasses, steady, unhurried. It was his money, Mr. Townsend. He chose how to distribute it. My dad grabbed the papers off the table, just snatched them, right out from under Finch's hand. Finch didn't flinch. Those are copies. The originals are filed with the Claremont County Probate Court. Greg stared at the pages in his fist, then threw them on the table. They scattered like dead leaves. The room was completely still. My mom stood up. Her chair didn't hit the wall. She stood with precision, the way she did everything. Controlled fury. He wasn't in his right mind, she pointed at Finch. You know that. He was 80 years old when he signed this. 78, Finch said. And the will was witnessed by 2 licensed physicians who certified his competency at the time of signing. Doctors can be wrong. These doctors were not wrong. My dad turned to me. His face was the color of raw meat. Did you do this? Did you go behind our backs? I didn't know, I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. Bullshit. He slammed his palm on the table. The water pitcher shook. You were down there every goddamn week, whispering in his ear, Greg. Aunt Ruth's voice cut through the room like a blade. One word, his name. But the way she said it stopped him mid-sentence. He looked at her. She looked back. 78 years old, 5'2", and she didn't blink. Sit. Down. He sat. I'd never seen my dad listen to anyone that fast. Diane recalibrated. She smoothed her blouse, collected herself, and turned to Finch with the voice she used at church fundraisers. Warm, reasonable, dripping. Harold, we appreciate your diligence, but surely Walter left something for his own son? A keepsake? Anything? Finch reached into his portfolio and removed a sealed envelope. Cream-colored. Handwritten address on the front in slightly trembling script I recognized immediately. There is one more item, Finch said. Your father-in-law left a personal letter. He instructed me to read it aloud, and he specified that I should do so only if his son and daughter-in-law reacted with hostility to the terms of the will. Silence. He anticipated this, Finch said. Please sit down. We are not finished. The envelope sat on the table between us like a grenade with the pin pulled. Grandpa's handwriting. I knew it the way you know a voice in a crowded room, immediately, without thinking. The same slightly shaky cursive he used on every birthday card he'd ever sent me. The same blue ink from the same fountain pen he'd kept on his desk since 1983. Across the front, in careful letters. To be read aloud at my will reading, W.T. My dad stared at it. His jaw worked like he was chewing something that wouldn't go down. You can't just read some letter and pretend it's legal, Diane said. Her voice had shifted. No longer warm. No longer reasonable. Just sharp. Finch folded his hands on the table. This letter is not a legal document, Mrs. Townsend. It is a personal statement. Your father-in-law asked me to honor his final wish, and I intend to do so. We'll contest this. Greg's voice was low. All of it. The will, the letter, everything. That is your right, Finch said, but I would advise you to listen first. Pastor Jim shifted in his seat. Dave and Patty exchanged a glance. The paralegal's pen had stopped moving. I couldn't stop looking at the envelope. Something about seeing Grandpa's handwriting, here in this room, 3 weeks after his funeral, made him feel present, like he was sitting at the table with us, like he'd planned this exact moment down to the chair placement. Finch picked up the envelope, turned it over, ran his thumb under the seal. Before I read Walter's letter, he said, he asked me to provide some context. A brief summary of events that led to his decision. He pulled a second document from his portfolio, a single printed page. Walter compiled this himself. I only formatted it for clarity. He laid it flat on the table. Even from my end, I could read the header. Timeline of relevant events, 2018 to 2023. My father went pale. Finch read the timeline line by line. His voice stayed flat. No inflection, no judgment. Just dates and facts, like a court reporter. March 2018. Gregory Townsend signs power of attorney documents and arranges the transfer of Walter Townsend to Sunrise Meadows Assisted Living. Walter Townsend was not consulted. My dad opened his mouth. Finch kept reading. September 2019. Gregory Townsend lists and sells the family home at 14 Oak Hill Road without informing Walter Townsend. Walter learned of the sale from a former neighbor. Diane's eyes were on the table now. She wasn't looking at anyone. 2019 through 2022. No phone calls, no visits, and no written communication from Gregory or Diane Townsend to Walter Townsend. That is not, Greg started. January 2020. Walter Townsend is hospitalized with severe pneumonia, admitted to Millbrook General for 22 days. Andrea Townsend arrives within 6 hours and remains for the duration. Gregory Townsend is contacted by Ruth Dawson on 4 separate occasions. He states he will visit this weekend. He does not visit. Ruth sat very still beside me. Her hand found mine under the table and held it. June 2021. Diane Townsend blocks Andrea Townsend's phone number on Gregory Townsend's mobile device. She informs Walter Townsend that Andrea is too busy to call. A nurse at Sunrise Meadows later reports that Andrea contacted the facility's front desk, distressed, asking why her father would not answer her calls. I stopped breathing. I remembered that. The week I thought Dad had finally cut me off completely. The sick, hollow feeling. I'd called the Sunrise Meadows front desk in tears, and the nurse, Linda, her name was Linda, had patched me through to Grandpa directly. I never knew why Dad's phone stopped working. Now I did. I looked at my mother. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Ruth spoke for the first time since telling Greg to sit down. Her voice was quiet and absolutely level. I called you 12 times in 2020, Greg. You picked up once, and you hung up after 30 seconds. Finch set the timeline aside. He picked up the envelope again and withdrew 2 handwritten pages. The paper was cream-colored, heavy stock, the same stationery Grandpa kept in his desk drawer, the kind he used for letters that mattered. Finch put on his reading glasses. The room contracted around that moment. The walls felt closer, the ceiling lower, the air thicker. "I'll read this exactly as Walter wrote it," Finch said. He cleared his throat. "Greg." That was the first word. Just my dad's name. No dear. No, my son. Just Greg. If Harold is reading this out loud, it means you came for the money. And it means you were angry when it wasn't yours. I'm not surprised. I wish I were. My dad's hands were in his lap. His fingers were laced together so tightly the knuckles had gone white. I want you to know that I rewrote this letter 3 times. Each time, I tried to be kinder. But kindness is what got us here. 30 years of kindness. 30 years of excuses I made for you. 30 years of telling myself you'd come around. Pastor Jim was looking at his hands. Dave and Patty sat motionless. You are my son. I loved you from the moment your mother put you in my arms, and I have never stopped. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being my son and started being someone who was waiting for me to die. The sound that came from my father. I don't have a word for it. A breath that got stuck halfway. A sound like something cracking inside a wall you can't see. Diane put her hand on his arm. He shook it off. Finch turned the page. I didn't lose a son to death, Greg. I lost you to entitlement. And that is a grief I wouldn't wish on anyone. Finch kept reading. Let me tell you what I remember. I remember the day you put me in Sunrise Meadows. You drove me there in my own car. You carried 1 suitcase. You didn't walk me inside. You handed the suitcase to a woman at the front desk and said you had somewhere to be. I stood in that lobby for 10 minutes before anyone showed me to my room. The floor smelled like bleach. The mattress had a stain on it shaped like Rhode Island. That was March 15th, 2018. I remember the date because it was your mother's birthday. Patty put her hand over her mouth. I remember when you sold the house. Our house. The house where Maggie and I raised you. Where we hosted every Thanksgiving for 48 years. Where your mother planted those hydrangeas she loved so much. You sold it for $460,000. I found out from Helen Patterson next door. She called me crying. You used the money to buy a boat. Greg was staring at a point on the far wall. Not blinking. Not moving. And I remember Diane. She visited me once in 4 years. She brought a box of drugstore chocolates and took a photograph of herself sitting next to my bed. I saw it later on her Facebook page. The caption said, "Visiting Dad, family first." She stayed for 20 minutes. 14 of those minutes she was on her phone. I counted. When you're in a bed you can't leave, counting is about the only thing you can do. Pastor Jim looked at Diane. It wasn't a glare. It was worse. It was the look of a man reassessing everything he'd ever believed about someone. Every potluck she'd organized. Every prayer circle she'd led. Every time she'd stood in the church foyer with her hand on someone's arm, saying, "I'll pray for you," with that practiced sincerity. He was recalculating all of it, right there, in real time. Diane's face was rigid, controlled, but her right hand was trembling against the table and a blotch of red was climbing her neck like a vine. Dave was staring at the table. Patty had her hand over her mouth. The paralegal had stopped writing and was just sitting there, pen suspended, eyes wide. She never came back. Not once. Finch paused, took a breath. And Diane, I know about the phone. I know you blocked Andrea's number on Greg's phone. My nurse told me after Andrea called the facility's front desk in tears, asking why her own father wouldn't answer. You let my granddaughter believe her father had abandoned her, and you let me believe she had stopped caring. I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning at the edges, but the center, the letter, Finch's voice, my mother's white face, stayed perfectly sharp. Diane stood up so fast her chair rocked backward. "This is slander." Her voice cracked on the second word. He was a sick old man. He was confused. He was... Mrs. Townsend. Finch's tone didn't change. Not 1 degree. "This is a personal letter, not a legal accusation. Sit down, please." "I will not sit here and be... Diane." Pastor Jim spoke gently, the way he spoke from the pulpit. Calm, measured, sad. "Let Harold finish." She turned on him. "You're taking his side?" "I'm not taking sides. I'm listening." Diane looked around the room. At Dave, who wouldn't meet her gaze. At Patty, whose jaw was set. At Ruth, who met her gaze head-on with an expression that could have cut glass. At the paralegal, still writing. She had nowhere to go. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother run out of audience. No sympathetic faces to pivot toward. No convenient exit. No one willing to play the supporting role in her performance. Every person in that room had heard the same words, and every one of them was doing the math, comparing what Diane had shown them in public with what she'd actually done in private. The gap was enormous. It was Grand Canyon wide. She sat down, slowly, like the chair might break underneath her. I sat at my end of the table, hands flat against the wood, feeling the grain under my fingertips. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I hadn't said a word since I didn't know. I didn't trust myself to speak. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, what came out wouldn't be words. It would be 20 years of every swallowed sentence, every silence I'd chosen to keep the peace, every time I'd driven home from a holiday dinner, biting the inside of my cheek until it bled. I stayed still. Grandpa's letter was doing what I never could, saying what I never dared. Finch picked up the second page. "There is one final section," he said. "Walter wrote this part for Andrea. He looked at me across the table. For the first time all morning, his expression softened, just slightly, just at the corners of his eyes. May I continue? I nodded. My father didn't look at me. My mother didn't look at anyone. Finch began to read. I have to pause here for a second, because when the lawyer turned that page toward me, my hands were shaking. I didn't know Grandpa had written something just for me. If this story is hitting you the way it hit me, drop a comment and tell me, what would you do if you found out your own parents had been lying about you to your own grandparent? That they'd cut you off and let him think you didn't care? Now, let me tell you what Grandpa Walter wrote next. Andrea. Finch's voice changed when he read my name. Warmer, the way Grandpa would have said it. You never missed a Sunday. Not one. In 4 years, you drove 2.5 hours each way, every single week, to sit with an old man who couldn't offer you anything except his company and a porch swing that needed fixing. I was already crying. Silently, the way you cry when you don't want anyone to hear. You read to me when my eyes gave out. You brought me peach cobbler because you remembered it was your grandmother's recipe, and you got it right, every time. Maggie would have been proud. I was proud. Ruth's hand was on my back, firm, steady. You never asked for anything, not a dime, not a favor, not a thank you. You just showed up. Week after week, year after year, you showed up. My dad was looking at me now. For the first time in this room, he was actually seeing me. I don't think he liked what he saw, which was someone who had done the one thing he couldn't be bothered to do. I didn't leave you everything because you earned it, Andrea. I left it to you because you're the only one who never treated it like something to earn. Finch paused. He let that line settle. Then, the total estate, after taxes and legal fees, is valued at approximately $2.3 million. The number landed in the room like a stone in still water. Ripples everywhere. Patty inhaled sharply. Dave closed his eyes. Greg's face went through something I can only describe as a controlled demolition. The structure held, but you could see the cracks spreading. Diane stared straight ahead. Her hand had stopped trembling. It was balled into a fist. $2.3 million, and every cent of it, mine. Finch wasn't finished. He turned the page. And Greg, I owe you an apology too. That got my dad's attention. His head came up. A flicker of something, hope, maybe, crossed his face. I gave you everything when you were young. Every toy you pointed at, every car you wrecked, every bill I covered, every mess I cleaned up. I bailed you out of debt 3 times before you turned 30, and I never once made you feel the weight of it. I thought I was being a good father. I was wrong. Greg's jaw loosened, just barely. I never taught you how to build something, Greg. I only taught you how to receive. That was my failure as a father, and I've carried that guilt longer than you know. I watched my dad's face. Something was happening behind his eyes, some tectonic shift he wasn't ready for, an emotion he didn't have a filing system for. But understanding where entitlement comes from doesn't mean I should reward it. I love you, son, and I hope that one day you'll build something of your own, not because you have to, because you deserve to know what that feels like. Diane leaned forward. So he admits it. Her voice was venomous, triumphant. He made Greg this way. He just said so. Ruth turned to her. He admitted his part. What about yours? The words hung in the air. Diane opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She closed it, opened it again, closed it. Pastor Jim bowed his head slightly, the way he did during prayer. But he wasn't praying. He was giving Diane the courtesy of not watching her drown. Grandpa Walter didn't hate his son. I understood that now. He was disappointed. And disappointment, when it runs that deep, when it spans decades, is so much heavier than hate. Hate burns out. Disappointment just sits there, year after year, waiting for someone to prove it wrong. Nobody ever did. Finch turned to the final passage. The handwriting on the page was smaller here. I could see it from my seat. Grandpa had been running out of room, or maybe running out of time. Andrea, use this money to build the life you deserve. Buy a house, travel, go back to school if you want. Do whatever makes you feel like the ground is solid under your feet. I pressed my palms flat on the table. Steady. Stay steady. But more than any of that, don't ever let anyone make you feel guilty for being loved. Don't apologize for it. Don't shrink from it. You are not taking something from your father. You are receiving something from your grandfather. There's a difference. Ruth was crying, silently, like me, the Townsend way, I guess. And if your parents try to take this from you, and they will, remember, I chose you, not as punishment for them, as a gift to you, because you are the best of this family, and someone needed to say it while there was still time. Finch folded the letter, placed it on the table, removed his glasses and set them beside it. 10 seconds of silence. Maybe more. The kind of silence that has texture. You can feel it pressing against your skin. Pastor Jim stood slowly, walked to the head of the table, and shook Harold Finch's hand. Didn't say a word, just shook it, and sat back down. Greg stood up. His face had gone from red to gray. He looked at the letter, at Finch, at me. We're contesting this, he said. His voice was flat, emptied out. Every single word. He took Diane by the arm. She grabbed her handbag, the new one, the one she'd bought for the occasion, and they walked out. The door closed behind them with a click that sounded like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Nobody followed them. The room felt different after they left, lighter, emptier, but in a way that made it easier to breathe. Finch waited a full minute before speaking. He was good at that, reading a room, knowing when people needed space. Andrea, he said, are you all right? I almost laughed. I don't know. Are you supposed to feel all right after something like that? A faint smile. In my experience, no. What happens if they contest? I asked. Finch reached into his portfolio and produced one more document. The man was a magician with that leather bag. Your grandfather included a no-contest clause in the will. It's standard but effective. If any beneficiary, or potential beneficiary, challenges the will in court and loses, they forfeit any claim to personal effects, keepsakes, heirlooms, or other items not specifically addressed in the estate distribution. Meaning? Meaning if your father contests and fails, which, given the physician certifications, the witnesses, and the video... The video? Finch nodded. 6 months before his passing, Walter asked me to arrange a video recording. He sits in his room at Sunrise Meadows, looks directly into the camera, and explains his decision in full. He is articulate, lucid, and... Finch allowed himself a small, sad smile. Rather blunt. I leaned back in my chair. Grandpa hadn't just written a letter. He'd built a case. Layer by layer, document by document, over years. This wasn't rage. This was a man who knew exactly what was coming and made sure the truth would outlive him. I'm not going to fight them, I said, but I'm not giving back what Grandpa chose to give me. Finch nodded. I wouldn't expect anything less. Your grandfather certainly didn't. Ruth squeezed my shoulder. Pastor Jim stood, buttoned his jacket, and said one thing before he left. Walter would have been very calm about all of this, just like you. I didn't feel calm, but I was learning. 3 weeks later, Greg hired a lawyer, a guy from Cincinnati with a billboard on I-71. Family disputes? We fight for you? That kind of lawyer. The claim was diminished capacity. My father alleged that Grandpa Walter lacked the mental competence to alter his will in 2022 and that I had exerted undue influence during my visits. Undue influence. The legal term for she read him books and brought him cobbler. Finch responded with the physician certifications. 2 independent doctors, both board certified, both confirming Walter's full cognitive function at the time of signing. He followed that with a copy of the video. I never saw the video myself. Finch told me about it afterward. Grandpa Walter sitting in his room at Sunrise Meadows. Clean shirt, combed hair, looking straight into the lens. The television behind him was off. The bed was made. He'd prepared for this like he prepared for everything. Carefully, deliberately, with the quiet dignity that defined his whole life. He stated his name, the date, and his reasons. He named Greg. He named Diane. He named me. And he explained, in his own words, exactly why he'd made the choice he made. Finch said Grandpa's voice didn't shake once, that he spoke for 12 minutes straight without notes, without pausing, without looking away from the camera. 81 years old, sitting in a room with linoleum floors and a mattress stain, and he was more composed than anyone in that conference room had been. Greg's lawyer watched the video in Finch's office. According to Finch, the man sat quietly for 12 minutes, then advised Greg to drop the case. Fighting a video like that in front of a probate judge was a losing proposition, and the no contest clause made losing expensive. Greg called me that night. One last time. "You stole my father from me," he said. I held the phone with both hands. I could hear my mom in the background, saying something sharp I couldn't make out. "No, Dad," I said. "You left him." "I just didn't." He hung up. Diane blocked my number on every platform within the hour. Phone, email, social media. All of it. Gone. I stood in my kitchen and waited for the guilt to hit. The devastation. The crushing realization that I'd just lost my parents. It didn't come. Or maybe it had come a long time ago, and I just hadn't noticed when it left. News travels at the speed of sound in a town like Millbrook. Maybe faster. Nobody published anything. Nobody had to. Pastor Jim didn't gossip. That wasn't his way. But when a congregation member asked how Greg was handling everything, he simply said, "Walter made his wishes very clear." In Millbrook, that's a sentence that does a lot of heavy lifting. The neighbors on Oak Hill Road, the ones who'd watched Greg disappear, who'd seen my car pulling into Sunrise Meadows every Sunday, who'd watched Diane pose for that one Facebook photo and never return, they weren't surprised. Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived next door for 30 years, told me, "We always wondered why you were the only one who came. I guess your grandfather was wondering the same thing." Diane's standing in the community quietly dissolved. She wasn't kicked out of the Women's Fellowship at First Methodist. That's not how small towns work. She just stopped being invited to things. The phone calls dried up. The committee chair positions went to other people. Nobody was cruel about it. They simply stopped pretending. Greg had to sell the boat. The 26-foot Sea Ray he'd bought with the money from Grandpa's house. The house Grandpa didn't even know was being sold until Helen Patterson called him crying. Greg sold it to cover the legal fees from the failed contest. It went for less than he paid. Boats always do. Ruth told me she'd seen it listed online. $42,000. The listing said motivated seller. That's real estate language for desperate. I heard all of this from Ruth. I didn't look it up. I didn't Google my parents' names or check Diane's Facebook. I didn't need to. The point was never to watch them fall. The point was to stop breaking my own back trying to hold them up. There's a word for the feeling I had in those weeks after everything settled. It's not satisfaction. That implies I enjoyed it, and I didn't. It's not relief, exactly, because there was still a heaviness I carried everywhere. The closest word I can find is clarity. Like I'd been looking at my family through frosted glass my whole life, and someone had finally wiped it clean. The picture wasn't pretty, but at least it was real. The first night I slept in Grandpa's house, I didn't sleep. I sat in his armchair, the brown leather one with the cracked left arm, and looked at the room he'd lived in for almost 50 years. The bookshelves he'd built himself. The framed photo of him and Grandma Maggie on their wedding day, 1965. Her in a simple white dress, him in a suit that was slightly too big, both of them grinning like they'd gotten away with something. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like I'd been handed something enormous and fragile, and I was terrified of dropping it. I opened the drawer of his desk, the same desk where my parents had been rifling through folders the day after the funeral. and found a small leather-bound notebook, dark brown, worn soft at the edges. I opened it. Dates. Hundreds of them. In Grandpa's handwriting, shaky near the end but always legible. Every entry the same format: date, time I arrived, time I left, and a brief note. Sunday, March 3rd, 2019. Andrea arrived 10:15 a.m., left 4:30 p.m., read 2 chapters of East of Eden. Sunday, June 14th, 2020. Andrea arrived 9:45 a.m., left 5 p.m., brought peach cobbler, reminds me of Maggie. Sunday, November 22nd, 2020. Andrea arrived 10 a.m., left 3:15 p.m., first snow. She scraped my windshield before she left. Sunday, April 4th, 2021. Andrea arrived 10:30 a.m., left 4 p.m. Easter. She brought daffodils. Nobody else called. Sunday, December 25th, 2022. Andrea arrived 8 a.m., left 6 p.m. Christmas. She brought a small tree for my room. We watched It's a Wonderful Life. She cried at the ending. I did too, but I don't think she noticed. 4 years, over 200 entries. Every single visit I'd ever made, catalogued in a notebook he kept in his desk like a treasure. Some entries had little additions. Good day. She looked tired, but she never said so. Or, she fixed the remote for my TV, wouldn't let me call maintenance. Or simply, Sunday. Andrea came. He'd been keeping count. The whole time he'd been keeping count. I turned to the last page. Below the final entry, a Sunday 3 weeks before he died, he'd written one more line, in a hand so unsteady, it was almost illegible. I don't deserve her, but I'm grateful. I closed the notebook, held it against my chest, and for the first time since the funeral, I let myself fall apart completely. 3 months later, I moved to Millbrook full-time. I transferred to the Millbrook branch of the county library system. It was smaller than the Columbus location, 1 floor, 3 staff, a children's section that smelled like graham crackers. But the building had tall windows that let in good light, and on Tuesdays, a group of retirees came in for book club and argued about plot twists like it was a competitive sport. Grandpa would have loved it. I used a portion of the inheritance to establish a scholarship, the Walter Townsend Community Scholarship, $5,000 a year, awarded to a Millbrook High School graduate pursuing vocational training in construction, carpentry, or a skilled trade. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't a wing of a building with his name on it. It was the kind of thing Grandpa valued, practical, useful, and given to someone who was willing to build something with their hands. Ruth started coming over for dinner every Wednesday. She'd bring a bottle of wine she claimed was medicinal, and we'd sit on the porch. The swing finally fixed, I'd had it repaired the first week, and talk about Grandpa, about Grandma Maggie, about the old days before everything went sideways. I started therapy in January, not because of the money, because I needed someone to help me untangle 30 years of walking on eggshells in my own family. The therapist's name was Dr. Reeves, and in our second session, she said something that stopped me cold. You've been managing your parents' emotions since you were a child. That's not loyalty, that's labor. I sat with that for a long time. The house on Oak Hill Road started feeling like mine. I replanted Grandma Maggie's hydrangeas. I left Grandpa's bookshelves exactly the way they were. I hung a new photo next to the wedding picture, one of me and Grandpa on the porch swing, taken by Ruth 2 summers ago, both of us laughing at something I can't remember. It didn't matter what we were laughing at. It mattered that we were there. 6 months after the will reading, a letter arrived. Handwritten. My mother's stationery, the expensive cream-colored kind with her initials embossed at the top. I recognized it immediately. She used it for thank-you notes and passive-aggressive correspondence in equal measure. I opened it standing at the kitchen counter, still holding my coffee. Andrea, we are your parents. We raised you. We fed you. We gave you every opportunity. Your grandfather was a bitter, manipulative old man who spent his last years poisoning you against your own family. He used his money to divide us, and you let him. We deserve better than this. Greg is devastated. He lost his father and his daughter in the same year. I hope you're satisfied. You have our number when you're ready to do the right thing. Mom. I read it twice, put it on the counter, drank my coffee. No apology, no acknowledgement of the blocked phone number, of the nursing home, of the house sold without a word, of the Facebook photo and the 14 minutes on her phone, of the 3 years of silence, of the eulogy that got the book title wrong. Nothing. Just demands dressed up as grief, entitlement wrapped in the language of motherhood. I noticed she wrote, "We raised you." Present tense confidence in past events, as if raising me gave them permanent ownership over my decisions. As if feeding a child entitles you to their inheritance. As if obligation and love are the same thing. They are not the same thing. I learned that on a porch swing in Millbrook, Ohio, from a man who never confused the two. I sat at Grandpa's desk, my desk now, and wrote back. It took me 20 minutes and 4 drafts. The final version was 3 sentences. Mom, I received your letter. I hope you and Dad are well. I'm not ready to talk, and I don't know when I will be. I wish you both the best. I signed it Andrea. Not love, not your daughter, just my name. I sealed the envelope, walked it to the mailbox, and put the flag up. I didn't write back out of anger. I wrote back because complete silence felt like I was becoming them, and I refused to become them. I went back inside, washed my coffee mug, fed the cat, a tabby named Walter Jr. who'd shown up on the porch in November and never left. The letter was done, the boundary was set, and for the first time, holding the line didn't feel like cruelty. It felt like breathing. I'm sitting on the porch as I tell you this. It's a Tuesday evening. The oak tree in the front yard is enormous. Grandpa planted it the year he and Maggie moved in, 1966. 60 years of growing. It's taller than the house now. I didn't get rich from this story. I know 2.3 million sounds like a lot, but after estate taxes, legal fees, the scholarship fund, and the repairs this old house needed, new roof, new furnace, the plumbing was a disaster. What I have is enough. Enough to stop worrying about rent. Enough to work a job I love without wondering if I can make the car payment. Enough to breathe. But the real inheritance was never the money. It was permission. Permission to stop apologizing for being the person who showed up. Permission to stop feeling guilty every time I put myself first. Permission to look at my parents and say, not out loud, not to their faces, just to myself, quietly, on a porch swing at dusk. I deserved better, and so did he. Grandpa Walter taught me something no number on a check could buy. That love is not a transaction. You don't owe someone your loyalty just because you share their blood. Loyalty is earned. Presence is earned. And when someone shows you year after year that you're only worth their attention when you have something they want, believe them. If you're watching this tonight, and you're the one in your family who always shows up, who drives the 2.5 hours, who makes the cobbler, who sits in the hospital chair, who gets nothing but silence in return, I see you. Grandpa Walter would have seen you too. The house is quiet now. The porch swing creaks in the wind, same as it always did. But this house is mine. And for the first time in 27 years, I don't have to justify that to anyone. There's one more thing I haven't told you. A week after I moved in, I was organizing Grandpa's desk, moving things around, making space. The notebook, the one with all my visits logged, I'd placed it on the bookshelf between Hemingway and a dog-eared copy of East of Eden. But that evening, something made me pick it up again. I don't know why. Maybe the light was hitting it differently. Maybe I just needed to feel close to him. I opened it to the last page. The entry I'd already read. The line at the bottom. I don't deserve her, but I'm grateful. And then I saw it. Below that line, in smaller writing, different ink, a thinner pen, scratched into the paper like it took everything he had, was one more sentence. It must have been written days before he died. The letters trembled. Some of them barely held their shape. Andrea, If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Don't cry too long. Go live. That's all I ever wanted. I closed the notebook, held it for a while, placed it back on the shelf, next to the Hemingway, right where it belonged. I walked out to the porch. The air smelled like cut grass and somebody's wood fire down the road. The oak tree rustled. The swing creaked. Millbrook was settling into evening the way it always does, slowly, easily, without any hurry at all. I sat down, took a breath, a real one, the kind that fills you all the way up. My name is Andrea Townsend. I'm 27 years old, and I just inherited the most important thing my grandfather could give me, the right to choose my own life. And that's where my story ends, for now. But I want to hear yours. If you had to choose between keeping the peace in your family and standing behind what someone you loved left for you, what would you choose? Drop peace or protect in the comments. I read every single one, and if this story reminded you of someone, the grandparent who always saw you, the parent who never did, the aunt who told you the truth when nobody else would, share it with them. You'll find more stories like mine in the description below. Thank you for staying until the end. I mean that. Grandpa Walter would have liked you.